Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the moderator of the next session, Scott Young.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this session on critical raw materials. Please join me in welcoming my panel up on the stage.
Thanks.
All right, our discussion is around critical raw materials and some of the geopolitical choke points and challenges that we have in sourcing them. I'm very pleased to be joined on stage by Davyd Aloian, the Deputy Minister for Strategic Industries of Ukraine, Juan Battaleme, who's the State Secretary of International Affairs with Argentina, Karel Eloot, Senior Partner with McKinsey, and Petr Pudil, who is entrepreneur, investor, founder of BPD Partners, and the chair of the GLOBSEC US Foundation. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being here on stage for this discussion. Sorry, I should introduce myself. My name is Scott Young. I'm the Director of Strategic Initiatives at Eurasia Group. We're a geopolitical risk advisory firm based in New York, and we're ready to go. I'm going to start by saying the obvious things so that my panelists do not get to do that, and then we'll get right to it with you, Karel. Critical minerals are important. We know this. They are indispensable. They are upstream of basically every industry that will define the 21st century. Some of them are fungible, some of them are not. And really, there is one actor on the other side of the world that is willing to put its thumb on the scale when it comes to critical mineral processing, refining. And this week, we saw it with the US-China trade deal in London, rare earths as well. Karel, let's start with you. I'd like you to describe the magnitude of the problem when it comes to critical minerals. Is China going to be dominant? If so, for how long? And does the West have a chance?
Yeah. So that's really the good question, maybe also to start with. It's obvious that the gap is big, right? We're all very clear on that. And the gap is, of course, big because when you look at China has started with their go-out policy over 25 years ago, and then with the Belt and Road Initiative, which is 12 years ago. So this is a long time in the making, a lot of work and investment that has happened. To give you an idea, there is from 2020 to today, Chinese companies have invested around $160 billion in sub-Saharan Africa, right, to build something there. So the gap is big. But your question is can Europe catch up? I think clearly Europe needed to wake up, which has happened. And then I think the conference says Europe needs to step up. And I think that's probably the right way to think about it. Because the playbook of the Chinese of going outside of China to secure minerals is a playbook that the Japanese had already used before them, right? Like the Japanese mining houses even today are very strong and go beyond Japan. And I think if we think about, your question was also can the West, right, catch up? Well, I think the West is not the West, right? There is a difference between Europe versus North America. North America also has Canada, which has a long history already in mining. And we can learn from Canada. The starting point in Europe is worse than in the US. I think if you look in lithium, we don't have any local domestic lithium for the demand that we have. The US has already 25% as a starting point. So we cannot, take the West as one. We need to look into the details. The important thing to learn from China is demand. Having demand is very important. So this means that we need to make sure that, in Europe, we don't just solve a problem for minerals, but we need to have these downstream industries that are competitive, that need this material and will be successful in paying the price for it to domestic industry. And so there is a lot of things to be accelerated. I talked about Canada. Canada and Australia, for instance, typically the time to permit is 2 years, maybe 3 years. right? In Europe, the time to permit can go to 15 years, right? US is also a bit better than Europe in this. So there is real homework to be done when we talk about actions and talk about step up. And we need to get the funding. We need to get the right de-risking of the chains. All very obvious. Maybe let me finish with saying one more thing, which is like when we say, can we catch up, right? There is certain areas where we cannot probably catch up. If you look at like where the lithium is already today, do we really want to catch up there, or do we want to do what China has done, is to define where we want to win in the future, right? And invest in these technology developments. So that I think is something important, is like when we step up, let's step up to be strong in the future rather than trying to fix something that is maybe not fixable anymore at this point in time. And a last thought would be also Europe. Europe is a continent. I was listening to some of the speeches this morning, and people talk, yeah, in Europe, we don't have like the energy that allows us to industrialize Europe. But, you know, there is not Europe energy. There is different countries, and some parts of Europe are good for energy, right? So this is exactly how we need to start thinking, and I think if we step up with granularity, we can clearly close the gap or work on closing the gap, the right gap.
Thanks, Karel. And I was just reflecting as you were speaking about the permitting timelines, that we're only 3,500 hours into the second Trump administration. It feels like it's been longer, but it's been just over 100 days. Petr, I'd like to come to you, because you're involved with the GLOBSEC US Foundation. You just released a fantastic report on the challenge that Europe and the US have when it comes to critical mineral and raw material supply chains. My question for you is, do you think, to pick up on Karel's last point, do you think Europeans are willing to do the hard, dirty work of extracting, processing, refining, and producing critical minerals?
First of all, I'm optimist, so we have to, as a Europeans, to close that gap and do whatever is possible to be like less dependent. Obviously, what the report showed to everyone, that Europe is much more dependent than US regarding critical raw materials. But I think that we have to think about this strategically, as Karel perfectly mentioned. You know, we shouldn't play under the Chinese playbook. So it's an absolutely naive idea to believe that we can catch up with Chinese regarding all lithium-based technologies. So we should be very carefully observing what are the technology of the future, what is the next generation of technologies like sodium-ion batteries, and to really do a proper assessment if we could be competitive in the long term with Chinese or anyone else on the globally, and to bet on that technologies. Otherwise, I think that we would copy the example of Northvolt and other promising startups which bet on the competing at the same technology basis. And the other thing is, obviously, so it's a demand side. So we should really be focused how we consume these critical raw materials. We should perfectly design the specific policy tools for particle critical raw materials, because there is no silver bullet like a playbook. It's very different if you talk about copper or germanium. It's a completely different market. But with mining, you know, I think that the European Commission identified some critical projects, but with full respect, even if all of these opportunities would be materialized in the upcoming years, we still should be in a very critical position. I would love to see like a strategic alignment, cooperation with some of the countries on the global south, led by European Union, deploying capital, innovative technologies in that country. So having an Argentinian representative here would be great to see that. Otherwise, we would be always in a position of consumers rather than someone who is building an independent position.
It is worth noting that there are some initiatives that are looking to build those ties, whether it be the Mineral Security Partnership, whether it be the PGII, that there are initiatives to sort of bridge some of those challenges. But I'd love to come back to your point around innovation. You mentioned battery chemistries, you mentioned energy density, just sort of some of the new technologies that are coming when it comes to where you use critical minerals and around energy efficiency, et cetera. But let's go south to you, Juan. Argentina, home to some of the largest lithium reserves in the world. We talked about lithium with both Karel and Petr. Most of it concentrated up in the Puma region in northwestern Argentina. Argentina has been really interesting, though, because it has taken a lot of Chinese investment, Chinese support around developing its lithium industry, which is traditional brine, which is different than DLE and hard rock. My question for you is, given the current geopolitical environment, what does that mean for Argentina's relationship with its largest lithium customer, China, the United States, and Europe as well?
Well, thank you. Let me say that it's easy to answer because, in part, my previous colleague told plenty of things around it. But look, if you look Latin America and Argentina specific in the issue of critical raw resources, when you look China against United States and Europe, you will find that China has capital ownership and long-term access, and that is the real advantage that China has over European. And when you look the Latin America, not the Western Hemisphere, but if you look Latin America, and if you compare Latin America position with Africa, for example, China is dominant, and in Latin America, China is strong, in Argentina is strong, but also Japan is a good competitor of China in the northwest part of the Argentina. But actually, the European Union is absent on this competition. So it's really hard for you Europeans try to catch up. In part, the reason that explains that is because China moved faster, looking some sort of partnership, doing aggressive memorandum of understanding against this idea of shared values-based partnership that Europe proposed, which is not fit well with the political institution that managed Latin America in the last 20 years. When you look the populist wave that Chavez, Nestor Kirchner, and other political leadership in Latin America faces, they were quite smart in use the Chinese relation and the Latin American resources and Argentine resources in order to gain political advantage inside Argentina and everywhere in Latin America. When you look the Western Hemisphere, United States remains strong, but we usually think that Latin America is part of the old Monroe Doctrine kind of a mindset in the United States. That mindset still remains, but to be fair, Latin America is quite open now to foreign influence and to foreign investment, like China in Venezuela, in Iran, in Colombia, Russia in Venezuela and in other parts of Latin America. So it is interesting for all of you to know that this idea of we belong to the same global south, it's quite incorrect, because in this issue of critical mineral, the global south, for example, Africa and Latin America, we have plenty of different interests on that. And China has the opportunity to secure through the Indian Ocean and extending sea line of communications the position of the critical raw material. But when you look from a transatlantic perspective, the European and the Americans are able to disrupt the Chinese sea line of communication when you look at the raw material. So I will start in that sense, and I stop here, and I'm still waiting.
Great. Thank you. David, let's come to you. We'll bring it a little bit closer to home here in Europe. It's not just about critical minerals, the magic rocks, as we call them inside Eurasia Group. There's also chemicals, there's also other specialty raw materials as well that are essential for a well-functioning economy, well-functioning society. We've been thinking and learning about the importance of supply chain resilience since 2020, since the pandemic, but really over the past 3 years, when we were backstage, you were telling me about some of the lessons that Ukraine has learned when it comes to cooperation around sourcing the components and the raw materials that Ukraine needs at this time. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, sure, thank you. So since the full-scale invasion, we were first to change our focus on within the strategic industries, on the main strategic industries that we have in our country currently. It's the defense industry. And since then, we have learned a lot of lessons, because like the industry development and scaling up of the production was going like in parallel together with the constant challenges and bottlenecks that were appearing. And we were learning from those experiences that we had. And one of the main lessons that we have learned is that you need to secure your supply chains, and specifically the supply chains of the critical components, and they also consist of some chemicals, the chemicals that you need to secure your production capabilities. Because like without some secured supply chains, you will face the shortage of the so needed weaponry. And this is initially we're stating mainly for conventional weaponry. To produce like some artillery rounds, you still need some chemicals. You need nitrocellulose, nitroglycerin. You need to produce powders. If you can produce powders, then great. If no, you still also need some supply chains, and you need to secure them. So the issue of supply chains and critical components and chemicals specifically, this is the challenge that is faced around all the world. So there's a global shortage of nitrocellulose and nitroglycerins and other chemicals. And this also was coming together within the financial issues that our industry have faced. So all this brought us to the decision that were needed to be done in order to diversify like the supply chains. We have worked together with our partners and already have some successful stories, both within the scaling up the industrial capabilities to produce those chemicals in Ukraine, and also in cooperation with our partner nations in their countries. So the main lesson that we have learned is, once again, that you need to secure them. And the defense industry currently is not only like the industry that is helping us to resist the aggression from Russia, it's also a significant part of our economy. For the last 2 years, the third part of our GDP growth came directly from the defense industry. So accordingly, we see our defense industry as one of the main driving forces of our economy. And in order to keep this industry going and running with a high level of production capabilities that we have currently in Ukraine, we are engaging even deeply with our partners and fully understand that we need to have a strategic view on the special chemicals specifically.
Great, thank you, David. Karel, I want to come back to you, and while as we do the second round of questions, I just want to remind the audience that we do have the details about Slido. If you do have questions around these topics, please get them up there, and we will get to them at the end of the conversation. But Karel, I want to come back to you, and we talked, and Petr, maybe you want to jump in on this one as well. We talked backstage about the money piece and the price volatility, and the fact that right now, for most critical raw materials, critical minerals, for the minerals and metals that are big enough, the market infrastructure sits in China, in Guangzhou, in the Guangzhou Futures Exchange. And as we look at the challenge of whether it is important for the West to expand and build on its own supply chains, whether there needs to be alternative market infrastructure. I'm wondering if you could speak to the market piece underlying some of the bigger metals and minerals, and then Petr, if you could speak to how some of them are not big enough to warrant markets. Karel.
Yeah, also a good question. If you look at the Guangzhou exchange, right, it's of course an attempt to put a price on lithium, but And of course, the reason why people want, and especially want futures, is for making investments. You don't want uncertainty, right? So you want to somehow like have a way to hedge or have a way, right, to reduce the volatility and de-risk your project. Now, if you look at specifically lithium on that exchange, we need to still go to the fundamentals of the market. The fundamental of the market in lithium is that there is the top two buyers, right? Like who are the big battery producers, CATL and BYD. They have like almost a third of the market in batteries globally. So if you have a market structure like this, it's clear that these are already like de-risking themselves outside of the market. So then what do we see then in the market? And if you look at the lithium price is low, you could say, right? Like under 10,000. And why do I say low? It's like it's completely normal because it shows the market is efficient. There is a slowdown in electric vehicle growth. There is overcapacity, so the price is low. But that price is actually too low to incentivize asset development in Europe. So maybe when you look at it with European eyes, you say like, well, that futures exchange, I don't like too much that price because I want my project to be in the money. So again, I think if we go back to the fundamentals, we will need to look at each one of the different critical materials and look at like what is the situation. In terms of like global demand, where is that demand? What is actually captive? Like CATL has a cross shareholding with CMOC, the Chinese mining company, private, both of them private companies. So we'll need to go into the market fundamentals and then look at ways to de-risk. And I think again, de-risking will be to make sure, as you were saying, Petr, make sure that you are betting on the right technology, that like you are innovating your way to scale, right? And through this, you create then like an end-to-end ecosystem, a value chain that has the size to do more de-risking among different companies in the value chain or in the ecosystem, rather than to say, oh, we need to have like, we need to depend on an exchange to de-risk ourselves, right? That is, we know that is complicated. So I would really say like back to the cost curves for the different commodities, looking at like what is incentive pricing for capacity additions, and then again, if we want to incentivize developments in parts of the world where currently it is not. The project is not in the money, but we believe it's important for geopolitical reasons, security of supply reasons. We need to find the way to make that happen. But I would say, like, as somebody from the business world, eventually we need to be competitive, right? We need to be super competitive, right? And that is what makes us nervous when we see some of these large Chinese companies being very competitive, right? And now, like I would say, flooding the Chinese market with like cheap solar, so that like they are like breaking all their targets and have new records of like renewable energy installation because they are very competitive.
Thanks. And Petr, let's pick up on that point though. Is there ever going to be a market solution for some of these minerals and metals? And Karel, you're actually alluding to one of the challenges of this discussion, which is we're making generalized statements about anywhere between 30 and 50 minerals and metals, and you can pick and choose lithium and cobalt to make one argument, and then you can pick and choose dysprosium and terbium to make the completely opposite argument. So it is one of the challenges of this discussion, but we're going to make our way through it. Petr, to you though, I'm curious whether there is a national security dimension here where the decision to rely on a single non-market actor, let's call it China, or like a one-man OPEC, for sourcing high-performance magnets, like samarium cobalt magnets, Or is that something that we can just leave up to the market? Because right now, I think everyone in this room would know that 99% of heavy rare earth elements are extracted, processed, refined, and separated in China. And those magnets are essential for advanced defense systems, something that is top of mind for Europe. So I'm curious whether this is something that we can just leave to the market, or whether there's a national security imperative that supersedes that.
Yeah, well, I think that we have to define what strategic autonomy means. And doesn't mean that you need to build a bakery to feed entire world or entire city, but you need to demonstrate that you have a capability to scale up that. And if you talk about these small elements, rare elements, they are simply essential for defense and many other things. And China is completely dominating that. And using as a tool, look, that's what President Trump motivated to start to negotiate the tariff deal, because China implemented export license policy. And so we desperately need to demonstrate that we have a capability to scale up in all these critical raw materials, which not necessarily mean that we have to be totally independent to China, but China has to understand that if things are going really bad for us, we have a plan how to be independent. And not having some like a policy incentives, like a stockpiling, contract for difference, whatever, de-risking mechanism is essential, because market will not step into the shoes of governments to fight with China in the benefit of society. That's not the way how the capitalism works. But at the same time, I would be very much worried to like incentivize with various subsidy schemes. Subsidy is good for research and development, but we are in the stage where we need to scale up particle solutions in Europe and US. And there is a lot of like a policy mechanism, most of them are described in our report, which could be utilized. But I think that we should be also like a very much focused on the demand side, you know. We should really incentivize to market to reduce the consumption of these materials, which are really rare, and we are paying a cost for that. Not only what is driven by market, but even the policy cost, because we have to negotiate some trade deals with Chinese and others just to be in a position that we have access to that material. So there are external costs which we are paying to the fact that we simply somehow overlooked what is happening in China 20 years ago.
Thanks, Petr. I see that we have some great questions coming up on Slido. We'll get to them in just a second, but Juan, Petr mentioned capacity building. I'd be curious for your thoughts on what efforts Argentina is undertaking when it comes to boosting its critical mineral capacity, not just in terms of lithium extraction, but also in terms of moving down the value chain, in terms of keeping some of those jobs at home. How important is that for Argentina? Or is Argentina happy to just be a lithium miner?
Exactly. No. We just started as the recent presidential tour to Europe ended with two important agreements, one in energy with Italy, the other one on critical mineral resources on France. Actually, France and Germany are in the northwest part of the country doing some exploitation, and we are making some market reform. But the important thing that Argentina in this moment fits quite well in order to answer and to close the gap that my previous colleague mentioned, because China, even if they have an important position in Latin America, they cannot weaponize the raw material as they can do it in their own country or even in Africa, because Latin America has better institutions and better strategic autonomy, if you like. And also, if Europe wants to step up, it must look again to Latin America, because when you think about the broader picture on Latin America was an important part of the Ally strategy to defeat Germany, for example, in the First and the Second World War. And it's going to be part of the same strategy if we think that the war is going to be in a larger conflict in the near year. So Argentina is open its market. It's good to do business right now, especially in mining, because also mining has a role in our own defense modernization. So, and we are looking for not only for European partners, but also for a more smart type of partnership with Europe, because Europe from time to time try to impose a kind of partnership that not fit, as I said before, fit well with the institutional landmark of Latin America, and the Chinese are quite clever in adapting there to us, even if they are not playing hardball with us. So it's interesting how they move previously and how the European missed the opportunity in early 2000.
Great, thank you. Last question to you, David. We spoke a bit about the operation that Ukraine pulled off a few weeks ago when it came to drones. Drones need batteries, batteries need critical minerals. What advice would you give European policymakers when it comes to securing their supply chains and when it comes to sourcing the raw materials for the defense sector? What advice would you tell other European countries that are looking at what's happening in Ukraine right now?
The main advice is to try to reduce the dependence from one supplier, so currently to make a diversification of the supplies. And once again, based on our experience and lessons that we have learned, is you should use the available technologies on the market to reduce the gap between the demand and the available capability within those critical components or materials. What we are currently doing in Ukraine, we are reusing already used some of those components and bringing them back to life, using them with our products. And in these terms, we can also scale up the production of the final goods of the weaponry. This also helps us to scale up significantly, even like, as you mentioned, the FPV drones. So just last year, we have produced more than 2.2 million of FPV drones, and the existing capability for the production of those FPV drones was even like twice more. And the main challenge was within two things. This is obviously for Ukraine, is within the funding. And the second one was specifically within the components. And this year, we already learned from last year's experience, we're gonna work towards doubling this capability within the actual production and even be able to scale up it with a number of times. So using the available technologies that are on the market and reusing some of those components and batteries wherever that was used, this is something that helps us to also fulfill our market and our capabilities within those components that are needed.
Great, thank you. Well, we have some great questions on the slide. I'm going to start with the top one that was been upvoted 6 times. For the panel, let me rephrase it. Who are the under-leveraged players in the critical mineral space? Countries or companies that could do more? Who's underperforming when it comes to critical minerals, and where? Who wants to take that one? Petr.
Well, I think that question is very much associated with another one, and it's again back to technologies and countries. You know, definitely the worst performer is Europe, undoubtedly. And I think that what could change the situation is to be focused on the technology of the future, and just on the energy transition. It's definitely sodium-ion, because we look what is happening in China. CATL and BID announced a massive investment into that technology, which is not based on lithium, which is based on sodium. And Europe it's a superpower in sodium. Germany is the biggest producer of sodium. So we as Europeans should bet on something which we have here, which we have a leverage to deploy for our industry, and not to be dependent fully on imported critical minerals. which doesn't mean that we don't need LFP licenses from China for some period of time, definitely yes, but in the long term, we should definitely play in the technologies of the future. Using ice hockey language, we definitely lost the first period, and we have to change the game strategy for the second period.
Does anyone else want to come in on that? I would also add to that question that there are different choke points, right? It's not just, because we're not just talking about extraction. It's deposits, it's extraction, it's processing, it's refining, it's separating, it's taking oxides and turning them into actual usable products. And the scale of Europe's ambition, to your point, Petr, is pretty high. Under the European CRM Act, which was passed last May, Europe has said that they want to reduce its single source supply dependency from what is above 90% for lithium and manganese and rare earth elements to 65%. And when I hear 65%, I do the math on, well, that's 48 to 60 months between now and 2030. Europe has identified 15 strategic projects. The scale of the ambition is phenomenal. I think the question is whether Europeans are willing to do the work required to get from the current status quo, where lithium prices are very low, to your point, Karel, to one that is a little more resilient and a little calmer for the Europeans. So I think that is the real question, is admiring the problem has never been Europe's problem. Europe has always been very good at identifying what the challenge is. Diagnosing it, great, best in the world. It's whether it is willing to get the deposits that Europe has under its ground out of the ground and turning it into a product that can be used for advanced computing and clean technologies. Next question, actually, to segue to that, which technologies, if any, does the panel believe are the most promising when it comes to mitigating the bottlenecks for critical minerals?
Well, I think when you think about technologies, we typically think about maybe the supply side, because we're now talking a lot about the supply side, but we can also do what you were saying, Petr. We can first think about the demand side, right? And then there's extreme examples when you say, okay, I go from lithium ion to sodium ion. Okay, I don't need lithium anymore over time. And that's an extreme example where the lithium has gone for a part of the market. But you can actually also, like for instance, do lithium together with silicone to reduce the lithium content in the battery. And that is a more gradual thing, but that is a good example of something like if we in Europe are good at application research, application development, we can also reduce our demand. Or if with the rare earth, we can go from rare earth motors to electromotors that don't require so much rare earth. This is a choice we have. But again, it's application research. It's not like, oh, we need to secure minerals here or this. We can already reduce our demand and be smart on that. So that's on the demand side. And of course, on the supply side, it's also how can we get more out of what is already there. For instance, when we think about brownfield expansion, and we have certain plans, how can we do that more efficient? How can we, with the same capital expenditure, get a bigger expansion, right? Or how can we, for everything that is in the money? Because part of the problem is there is some of the projects not in the money, and then you will not find funding and so on. But like for the ones that are in the money, how can I accelerate the development to develop the pipeline faster? Or how can I get more out of circularity? Because that's also a way to reduce the primary demand. So there's, on the technologies, I would say this is not just, oh, let's find some mining engineers and like that will solve it all. No, right? Again, this is end-to-end. And we need a lot of smart people across the chain and money, right? So
throwing money at the problem is my takeaway from that, Karel. Also, and does anyone else want to come in on that? If not, I'm going to exercise the moderator's prerogative, and I would answer that question by pointing to geothermal, which doesn't require any critical minerals at all, and it doesn't apply to everything, but it's a renewable energy that you can redeploy oil field services to access energy source that is good for stationary grid storage, et cetera. So that would be my answer to that question. I'm conscious of time, and I know we have to get to the Western Balkans in just a moment. My closing question for the panel, and I'll start from at that end, Petr, and come down the line, and it's also a question for the audience. And so we're going to have a Slido. It'll go up on the Slido, so we'd be very, very interested to hear the audience's perspective on this as well. The question is, which actors or developments, when it comes to critical raw materials, when it comes to critical minerals, when it comes to critical components, who are the actors that you watch, you're looking at when it comes to future developments? Who are you watching? Is it China? Is it MOFCOM? Is it the European Commission? Who are you watching for future indicators of where this topic is going? So Petr, I'll start with you, and we'll come down the line.
I think that I am closely watching what is happening with smelting, and if there is a technology which can avoid the smelting of copper and some critical minerals, that would be a miracle for the West, because then we will not need to send the material to China to be processed. So there's a couple of companies which are developing the technologies, and if they are successful, that would be a miracle.
Yeah, I think, of course, you see China there. Of course, we all will watch China, but like what I would really say is like, let's look at the companies, right? Let's not just look at geopolitics and what countries are doing, but like what are the companies in these countries doing, right? Like what are the technologies that are getting funding? What are the startups? And this is, I think you need to watch in China, right? Like your point around sodium ion batteries. Well, let's watch there what CATL is doing, for instance. So that's a company, right? And what choices they make. But here in Europe also, let's look at the startups. Let's look at companies. My message would be, let's look at companies.
Great. Juan?
So besides everything that was said, I will add the European American legislation on critical raw material, because for us it's quite important, because it give us not only the temperature, but also the idea of where we can develop a functional partnership with the United States, with European, and that for us as an Argentina is important. That will be my answer.
Thanks. Davyd?
What I'm personally looking for, like in the countries, it's mainly Asian countries, China, obviously, but on the other side also the processes that are ongoing currently in US. So this is main two focuses with this topic.
Thank you. And my answer to this question would be separators, the processing and refining part of the supply chain. It's not, deposits, we find them everywhere. Extraction, that's not the hard part, even though there are questions around financing, to your point, Karel. And downstream, we know the applications. The choke point primarily is when it comes to who is willing to process, refine critical minerals from raw feedstock into actual oxides, et cetera, usable products or raw materials. Great, and you can see you can see China and recycling being the two dominant answers when it comes to what the audience is saying. There's also a big finance piece here when it comes to money. So financiers, investment firms, VCs, and interesting to see both Australia and the US get a mention. Australia probably the most advanced processor in mining economy in the Western world. Thank you very much. Please join me in thanking my panel, Petr, Karel, Juan, and Davyd, for your contributions to this topic around critical materials. And don't go anywhere. We have Don't go anywhere. We have the stage will be passed to the session on the Western Balkans at a geopolitical crossroads. So thank you for joining us.